Thanks for joining me today. It's good to see you. Today we have something interesting to discuss when it comes to Nintendo and its patents. There's been an update for one of its patents. Now this patent is regarding a second screen that supposedly attaches to the Switch 2, allowing for dual screen or multi-screen gaming. This is already possible because the Switch 2 and the original Switch have a firmware feature that is called Game Share, and Game Share allows you to use another Switch device, whether that is the Switch or the Switch 2. It allows you to use that as a second screen. There are a number of different configurations in which you can use this. You can have one Switch on the TV and another Switch in your hands, or a Switch 2 in your hands, a Switch on TV, or vice versa. You can have a Switch 2 on TV or a Switch in your hands, and you can have effectively two screens. What we don't currently have is a way for those screens to be physically attached to each other, whether it is through a mounting or a bracket system. Now, this patent is interesting because I don't believe Nintendo would ship a standalone screen to use as a secondary screen for gameplay. The reason I believe they would not do this is because the dual screen gameplay feature through GameShare requires the other hardware to have an operating system on it. It requires the Switch or Switch 2 firmware. It would also need its own power source. So I don't believe Nintendo would create an accessory that just plugs into the USB-C slot of a Switch 2 in order to use as a second screen. There doesn't appear to be any hardware on the Switch 2 to allow for a graceful solution when it comes to mounting, such as a bracket, but we do have devices on the market right now, such as the Retroid 5. This is a handheld emulator device which uses emulation to play games, and the manufacturer of that has recently started selling a second screen which you can attach through a bracket, so you can use that device for dual screen gaming, for example, Nintendo DS. Now, I find this very interesting. I personally would like to see this, but I do not believe that this patent is specifically for a standalone screen to attach, because it looks like Nintendo's strategy relies on people already owning another Switch device. That is why they've added that Game Share feature to the original Switch firmware to allow players to use their Switch as a second screen. Now, there is a flaw here. As we've seen on SpawnWave and through my own personal experiences, I've gone around to family and friends and tested using Game Share between the Switch and Switch 2. I used my Switch 2 and other people's Switch, and what would happen is Game Share is not always reliable. Even if the two devices are right next to each other, sometimes the quality of the connection wirelessly is not very good, and it results in stuttering on the Switch, which means the second console, if it's the original Switch, is stuttery, it's not smooth, it cuts in and out, and it's not acceptable, it's not usable. I hope Nintendo finds a way to fix this. I would like to speak on this topic further, but that's where I'll leave it today. We've seen this happen on SpawnWave's channel, and now I've seen that for myself firsthand. But for some reason, my Switch 2 and my Switch work perfectly fine. If I use Game Share and say, for example, I'm playing a game, it works perfectly fine. The visuals are sharp and crisp. Gameplay doesn't cut out. I can even go from one end of a room to another, even go into a different room, and Game Share works great. So I hope Nintendo's able to iron that out. Now, with this particular patent, I doubt anything will come of it. I believe this is probably more of a way to probably mount a Switch 2 to a Switch 2, a Switch Lite to a Switch 2. I feel the most logical way to use a second screen would be to use a Switch Lite. I don't own a Switch Lite anymore. I gave that to someone. But otherwise, I would test to see what the weight is, if you were to mount a Switch Lite to a Switch 2. I personally would really love to see developers use the Switch Lite in a way where the Switch 2 stays docked and you use Game Share so that you can use your Switch Lite as a controller or your Switch as a controller, and then you have your map, your inventory on a screen there, and on the TV you have your full game. Now, I developed the final games for the Wii U and the 3DS, and those are in the Silver Falls series. There were a number of unique different titles, and they were very exciting to create, to share with people. Now, I believe there's 0% chance that Nintendo would open up the door for people to rely on hardware that requires two screens. And the reason being is because from a development standpoint, it is absurdly difficult to design a game that can use both one and two screens. I specialized on 3DS for years, and I've shipped titles on the Wii U and the Switch, and I've ported games from the 3DS to the Switch, and it is very difficult. You have to overhaul the logic of your game to take it from two screens into one. I'm sure there are a few developers working out there who understand that logistical task. Now, I've seen some YouTube videos of people saying, oh, well, developers will make their games so that it can be a single screen, and then if you want to use the two screen, there'll be an option. No, that will absolutely never happen. And the reason why that will never happen is because that requires a painful amount of work. If you create your UI for your game on a single screen, that is already a gargantuan task. That is huge. And to say, oh, why don't you just take your UI so that you can optionally put it on a second screen, that's absurd. That is an absurd task. That's like saying, why don't you make a car? Just build a car, but then if the user wants it to be a motorcycle, just also let it be a motorcycle whenever they want. It's an absurd request. It's an absurd expectation for developers to create their UI for a single screen and then to just plug in a second screen and say, hey, let it also be on the second screen. That's never going to happen. That takes way too much work, and there's zero payoff. There's no benefit to doing that, and it's a nightmare. It's just thinking about it makes me want to put my fist through my computer screen, because that is a logistical nightmare. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. I still have games that I created for the 3DS that people are asking me to remaster and bring to the Switch, and it's a major task redoing the entire UI, user interface, the heads-up display, taking it from two screens and putting it on one. So that, especially if you relied on touch as well, boy howdy, if your UI relied on touch and now you have to make it work on a single screen without touch, that's a big task. It's a challenge. So basically I don't think that much will come of this, and people are hoping this leads to DS or 3DS emulation, but 3DS and DS emulation is already possible on Switch 2 because we have Game Share, because we can use a second console as a second screen. That's already possible. We can do that. We just need Nintendo to basically sort that out, the logistics on their end of allowing publishers to put their DS and 3DS games on the eShop for use in the NSO, the Nintendo online services. Okay. It's basically all we need, and then, there would be some deal on the screen that says this requires the use of a second Switch 2 console or Switch to use as a second screen. Okay. It worked on the Wii U. It worked great. I really enjoy using DS games on the Wii U. Wii U's one of my favorite consoles. So, okay. Thanks very much. If you have any thoughts on that, I'd be interested in hearing from you in the comments, and we can just hang out and chat. All right, thanks everyone. Take care. I'll see you. I'll put some videos on screen if you want to see me talk about some other video games, and or maybe some adventures. I don't know. Who knows what'll be up there. Take care. I'll see you.